You know, sometimes the biggest surprises in the world don't come from wars, politics, or technology. They come from quiet revolutions that no one sees coming. In 2025, the World Bank released a report that shocked the entire world, not because of a crisis, but because of a miracle. A miracle of resilience, of growth, and of human spirit from a country many had underestimated for years, India. Today, I want you to listen carefully, not as an economist or a politician, but as a believer in what people can achieve when they refuse to give up. Because this story isn't just about numbers or policies, it's about how vision turned into action and how one nation's rise could inspire millions across the world. So stay with me till the end, because what you'll hear today isn't just India's story. It's a reminder of what's possible when a country or even a single person decides to rewrite their own destiny. The 2025 World Bank report on India sent waves through global financial circles, primarily because of one unexpected finding. The country's GDP growth rate exceeded 8%, outpacing most major economies and surpassing even optimistic projections. For years, analysts viewed India's growth potential with cautious optimism, citing its vast population, expanding digital base, and youthful workforce. Yet few expected it to rebound so strongly after the global economic slowdown that followed the inflationary pressures and trade disruptions of the early 2020s. The World Bank noted that this growth was not driven by one sector alone, but by a broad spectrum of industries, including manufacturing, services, and technology, reflecting a more balanced and resilient economic structure. This growth surge was attributed to several factors working together with surprising efficiency. One major driver was the government's aggressive investment in infrastructure, highways, renewable energy grids, and logistics networks that unlocked new trade opportunities and enhanced domestic productivity. Simultaneously, India's focus on digital transformation helped small and medium enterprises expand their reach, integrate with global supply chains, and tap into online markets, which had previously been out of reach. Moreover, the report observed a sharp rise in domestic consumption, indicating growing middle-class confidence and purchasing power. International investors who once viewed India as a complex regulatory environment were drawn back by clearer policy reforms and stable monetary management. Foreign direct investment inflows reached record levels, not only from traditional partners like the US and Europe, but also from emerging Asian economies seeking collaborative growth. This reflected a shift in perception. India was no longer seen merely as a developing nation with potential, but as a critical player shaping global trade dynamics. Another layer of surprise came from the timing. While several large economies struggle with stagnant growth, India's ability to sustain momentum highlighted its internal resilience and adaptability. Analysts who had earlier predicted a gradual slowdown due to global uncertainty were forced to revise their models. The report described this momentum as self-reinforcing, where digital innovation, entrepreneurship, and domestic market expansion created a cycle of confidence and reinvestment. The World Bank emphasized that this growth was not accidental, but the result of long-term structural changes that began years earlier. Reforms in taxation, digitization of welfare systems, and promotion of clean energy had silently built a foundation for sustainable acceleration that only became visible in full scale by 2025. The World Bank's 2025 report on India brought global attention to an unexpected transformation, the country's rapid shift toward a green and digital economy. What startled many observers was not just the scale of change, but the speed and integration with which India managed to blend sustainability with technology. For decades, India's economic story had been tied to industrial expansion and service exports. Yet in this report, the narrative evolved into one of innovation-driven sustainability. The World Bank noted that India had become one of the few large economies to achieve significant progress in renewable energy adoption while simultaneously advancing its digital infrastructure at a massive scale. India's renewable energy expansion became a case study for other developing nations. Solar and wind power projects saw record investments, with India emerging as the world's third largest producer of renewable electricity. This was achieved through both domestic innovation and global partnerships, creating jobs in rural regions and reducing dependence on fossil fuels. The report highlighted that nearly 45% of India's electricity capacity now came from clean sources, a milestone few believed achievable so soon. Alongside this, the introduction of large-scale electric mobility programs and sustainable urban planning further reinforced India's environmental commitment. On the digital front, India's transformation was equally profound. The digital economy accounted for nearly 1/5 of the GDP by 2025, powered by a network of startups, AI research hubs, and nationwide 5G connectivity. Initiatives in digital payments, e-governance, and fintech revolutionized the way businesses and citizens interacted with the state and each other. The World Bank praised India's Unified Payments Interface, UPI, as one of the most inclusive and efficient digital financial systems globally, enabling millions of people from rural and low-income backgrounds to participate in formal economic activity for the first time. This convergence of green and digital resolutions was not merely technological, it represented a strategic mindset shift. India's policymakers prioritized innovation that served both growth and sustainability, positioning the country as a model for climate-conscious development. Multinational corporations began to view India as a testing ground for clean tech and digital experiments, while neighboring countries sought to replicate its low-cost renewable model. The World Bank underscored that India's dual focus had not only improved its global image, but had also redefined the concept of progress for emerging economies, proving that economic advancement and environmental responsibility could go hand in hand. The World Bank's 2025 report surprised global observers by revealing that India's rural development had undergone a quiet but powerful transformation. For decades, the assumption was that India's growth story was primarily urban, driven by cities like Bengaluru, Mumbai, and Delhi. However, the new data showed that the heart of India's progress was beating in its villages. What caught everyone off guard was how inclusive this growth had become, bridging the urban-rural divide through innovation, digital access, and targeted social reforms. The report pointed out that rural infrastructure development had reached unprecedented levels, with better connectivity, electrification, and digital access empowering millions who had long been left behind. The spread of digital technology into rural regions was one of the most significant drivers of this transformation. Affordable smartphones, improved internet connectivity, and government-backed digital platforms opened doors to new opportunities. Farmers were now accessing weather data, market prices, and financial services online. Women in small towns were managing businesses through digital payment systems and e-commerce platforms. The World Bank emphasized that India's digital inclusion model was becoming a template for emerging economies, where rural populations often remain disconnected from formal systems of growth. Another major highlight was the rise in female workforce participation. The report noted that policies encouraging rural entrepreneurship and skill building had significantly expanded employment for women, especially in the microenterprise and handicraft sectors. This shift wasn't just economic, it was cultural. Rural women were gaining financial independence and contributing to local economies in ways that were reshaping social structures. Financial inclusion programs such as direct benefit transfers and rural microcredit schemes gave millions access to banking for the first time, reducing dependency and stimulating consumption. The World Bank also observed that rural infrastructure, roads, healthcare centers, and schools had expanded at a record pace. These investments weren't simply developmental, they were strategic, creating local markets that fed into the national economy. With better transport and digital integration, rural industries began contributing to exports and domestic demand in equal measure. This decentralized model of development, the report said, had strengthened India's economic resilience by ensuring that prosperity was not concentrated in a few cities. In short, what had once been seen as India's economic weakness, its vast rural population, had turned into a source of strength, proving that inclusive development could be both equitable and efficient when backed by digital empowerment and long-term vision. The 2025 World Bank report left global economists astonished by one of its most optimistic findings: India's rapid decline in poverty rates. Between 2020 and 2025, the report documented that over 70 million people had risen above the poverty line, marking one of the fastest poverty reductions in the modern world. This achievement came at a time when many developing nations were still struggling to recover from post-pandemic shocks, inflation, and unemployment crises. The surprise wasn't only in the numbers, but in the mechanism behind this transformation. The World Bank attributed India's progress to a combination of digital welfare systems, rural employment programs, and inclusive policy designs that targeted both urban and rural vulnerability simultaneously. One of the biggest game changers was the full-scale digitization of welfare delivery. India's direct benefit transfer system eliminated layers of bureaucracy and corruption by linking subsidies and financial aid directly to verified digital identities. This ensured that benefits reached the intended recipients efficiently and transparently. The World Bank highlighted how such a model saved billions in leakage and built trust among citizens who had long been skeptical of government aid programs. Additionally, a digital payment infrastructure like the Unified Payments Interface UPI became a lifeline for small traders and laborers during economic slowdowns, offering stability in uncertain times. Another crucial factor was rural employment through programs that provided guaranteed work, infrastructure development, and agricultural support. These schemes didn't just create temporary jobs, they improved local economies by building durable assets like roads, irrigation systems, and community centers. The combination of employment and social investment created a ripple effect, increasing income security and boosting local consumption. The World Bank described this as a model of sustainable poverty reduction where empowerment replaced dependency. Education and healthcare improvements also played an indirect yet powerful role. The expansion of rural schools, telemedicine services, and nutrition programs for children and women strengthened the foundations of long-term human development. When people became healthier and better educated, productivity naturally rose, feeding back into economic growth. The report concluded that India's success lay in its ability to blend technology, governance, and empathy, turning welfare into empowerment rather than charity. This transformation reshaped India's global image, positioning it as an emerging model for inclusive development in a world where inequality continues to widen despite economic expansion. The 2025 World Bank report highlighted a powerful yet unexpected outcome of India's economic rise, the growing influence of its global impact and soft power. Traditionally, discussions about India focused on its internal growth, but this report shifted attention toward how India's model began reshaping economic strategies in other developing nations. The surprise came from how quickly India transitioned from being a recipient of global advice to becoming an example of homegrown innovation influencing international policy thinking. The World Bank emphasized that India's success wasn't just measured in GDP or exports, but in its ability to inspire others to adopt similar development frameworks rooted in inclusion, technology, and sustainability. India's digital revolution, especially in financial technology, became one of its most influential exports. The Unified Payments Interface, and HIL, and other long banking systems were being studied or replicated in over a dozen countries across Asia and Africa. Nations that had long struggled with financial exclusion saw in India a model that was affordable, scalable, and effective in reaching even the poorest citizens. This was soft power of a different kind, not cultural or military, but technological and social innovation shaping global governance. The World Bank observed that India's example demonstrated how developing economies could leapfrog traditional barriers using digital ecosystems instead of relying solely on physical infrastructure. The report also noted India's rising leadership in renewable energy diplomacy through international initiatives like the International Solar Alliance. India became a voice for equitable climate cooperation, helping smaller nations access clean technology and financing. This shift from a developing country participant to a global facilitator of sustainability surprised many Western analysts who once viewed India as a reluctant player in climate action. The World Bank described this as the democratization of sustainability, where a large developing country took the lead in making green transitions accessible to others. Cultural and educational exchanges further expanded India's soft influence. The growth of its startup culture, digital education platforms, and skilled workforce inspired a new narrative of empowerment through innovation rather than dependence on aid. The World Bank concluded that India's approach was reshaping how the Global South viewed progress, not as imitation of Western systems, but as adaptation rooted in self-reliance and cooperation in a fractured global economy. India's rise offered a unifying vision of development grounded in technology, inclusivity, and shared prosperity. While the World Bank's 2025 report on India celebrated remarkable progress, it also carried a tone of caution. The report's final observations reminded global readers that with great growth comes great responsibility. India's impressive economic momentum was undeniable, but the World Bank highlighted several underlying challenges that could threaten its long-term stability if not addressed. Chief among them were income inequality, regional disparities, and growing environmental pressures, issues that risk widening the gap between rapid development and sustainable well-being. The warning was not a critique, but a call for balance, urging India to ensure that its economic rise remained inclusive, equitable, and ecologically responsible. The report pointed out that while millions had moved out of poverty, income inequality between the top and bottom tiers of society was still expanding. The benefits of growth were not evenly distributed, with certain regions and industries reaping greater rewards than others. Urban centers continue to attract massive investments, while some rural and semi-urban areas lagged behind. This uneven development risk creating a social divide that could slow down the inclusive progress India had achieved. The World Bank stressed that maintaining public trust and social harmony would depend on ensuring fair access to education, healthcare, and employment across all states. Environmental sustainability emerged as another critical concern. The same industrial and infrastructural boom that powered India's growth also increased the strain on natural resources. Air pollution, water scarcity, and waste management were cited as growing risks that could undermine both quality of life and economic productivity. The report advised India to continue its leadership in renewable energy and strengthen its environmental regulations to prevent the cost of progress from outweighing its gains. The World Bank also noted the importance of institutional reform and good governance in preserving stability. As India's economy became more complex and interconnected, ensuring transparency, efficiency, and accountability in public institutions became essential. Moreover, the report urged investment in human capital, education, skills, and innovation to keep pace with technological change. Without this, the risks of automation-driven unemployment could rise in coming years. The concluding message was clear. India had reached a turning point where its success must evolve into sustainability. The next chapter would depend not only on how fast India continued to grow, but on how wisely it managed the balance between ambition, inclusion, and environmental care. In conclusion, the World Bank's 2025 report on India is not just an economic document. It's a reflection of how resilience, innovation, and inclusion can redefine a nation's destiny. The world expected progress, but not this kind of transformation. From record-breaking growth to digital empowerment, from green energy leadership to poverty reduction, India's journey stood as a lesson in how vision, technology, and determination can create hope in uncertain times. Yet, the report also reminds us that real success lies not only in reaching new heights, but in ensuring that no one is left behind on the way up. Sustainability, equality, and human development must walk hand in hand with ambition. That is the true measure of greatness, not how much a nation grows, but how fairly it shares that growth. As we look ahead, the story of India in 2025 serves as a quiet reminder to the world that transformation doesn't come from privilege or power alone. It comes from the courage to believe, the discipline to act, and the humility to learn. Whether in Europe, Asia, or anywhere on this planet, this lesson speaks to all of us. The future belongs to those who innovate with purpose and lead with compassion. Thank you to everyone listening today. May this story inspire you to look beyond challenges, to see opportunity where others see limits, and to build something that outlives your own success. Wishing you all continued growth, courage, and clarity in your journey ahead. Good luck, and thank you for being part of this moment of reflection and hope.